to the Paranorm Girl podcast. I am your host, Kristen. It's an unfortunate fact that not all eyewitness accounts of Bigfoot are benign sunshine and peaceful roses. They are not always the pacifist hippie brethren of the forest we have so often been told. We don't have to believe the darker tales of Bigfoot or that they have potential to be aggressive, but if we are going to be open-minded to this subject, the entire subject, we need to at least look at that side of it. So today, we are going to go through some accounts and reported behaviors that relay a more aggressive portrayal of Sasquatch. Considering this side to the story can raise some good questions. If we can consider that maybe sometimes they do things that seem aggressive to outright violent, we can ask questions that might shed light on other aspects of the nature of this beast. While I was going through this research, every story I came across, I automatically had to ask, why? If this story is true and it happened in the way it is told, why would these creatures act in these ways? Was there a trigger? Was it reacting with intelligence and indignation? Was it wounded? Was it sick? Are they more like humans than we think? Easily angered and impulsive. A spicy Sasquatch is not simply the result of modern-day imaginations and flair for the dramatic. Some native legends tell us there were reasons to be afraid, to not venture out too far. Sasquatch was used in cautionary tales for children. Others spoke of the cannibalistic skookum and the dangerous Janusqua, highly territorial and strong enough to tear the heads off humans, and not above eating them either. Same with the seminal creature Esti Kapkaki. Now, a majority of native legends that I have heard are not dark or extreme. Bigfoot is the elder brother, protector of the forest. Same goes for a majority of the modern-day accounts that I've heard that report a far more benign experience with Bigfoot. However, as with those legends of old, we also have stories in the current day that are not so sweet. Some downright scary. Spooky campfire tale fuel, for sure. Let's start easy with a behavior of Sasquatch most of us are aware of, and I'm sure most of us have had our own thoughts as to why they do it. This behavior could be perceived as aggressive, if not just plain rude. Rock throwing. Years ago, a Dallas businessman was interviewed by an Eastern Texas TV station about his rock lobbing encounter. The man, who remained anonymous, says in the interview that he had never seen one and was never a believer in Bigfoot prior to the event. He stated that he and his family were camping in Shelby County when suddenly a huge stone was thrown at him through the woods and landed within 10 feet of him. He says it was large enough no human could have thrown it that far. It didn't take too long to spot his perpetrator standing 10 feet tall along with others of its kind who drew in closer, some within 15 feet of him. He said it was like something out of a Steven Spielberg movie and wasn't human as he knew it. There's not much more to this story that I could find. I would have liked to have known what happened next, maybe what they looked like. As far as the activity of rock throwing goes, this seems like a not all that bad story, a vastly different sort of encounter compared to the, say, 1924 Ape Canyon incident, where in addition to rocks thrown, there were Bigfoot on the roof and breaking through walls to get at these guys and try to pry them out of their cabin like sardines out of a can. They were big mad. So, we can't quite gather the entire story here, but could assume the reasoning behind these Shelby County Bigfoot tossing stones to be maybe they were trying to get his attention, which they succeeded in if the story is true. But then, why? They got his attention, but for what reason? It certainly is an attention-grabbing thing to do. There are hundreds of stories of hikers and campers who have had rocks, branches, logs, pine cones thrown at them. The through line, I find, is that it definitely, without a doubt, grabs the attention of the throwee, who then quickly puts it together, oh, we should probably watch our backs. Or very often it's, oh, we should quickly vacate the area. Just like you might with an animal who is bluff charging you, which Bigfoot has also been seen doing on multiple occasions. You take that hint that they are dropping and you go. It's widely thought that they do this because they are territorial or protecting nearby family. And based on certain details of other stories that do include display behaviors like a vocalization or grunting, like a bluff charge in addition to the throwing, this could very well be true. They're trying to get a message across now that they have your attention. But I found a rather interesting observation of chimpanzees written in an article published by PubMed Central. And I don't wonder if this might also come into play if we are considering Sasquatch to be a primate and sharing their psychology with other great apes. Both in wild and captive chimps, the ability to throw has been described as a form of tool use and has been recorded in both inter- and intraspecies agonistic encounters. Some have described it as a means of initiating communication. Aimed throwing, often seen without display behaviors, from a psychological or neurological standpoint, points to an element of planning on the part of the chimp. While throwing is seen as tool use, it is unique due to other observed tool usage, such as nut cracking, termite fishing, and ant dipping, which are used for the purpose of obtaining food and is therefore reward reinforced. While aimed throwing is seen in wild chimps, it is also seen in captive chimps who are not overtly getting rewarded for it. In short, what appears to be the main reward for throwing is the simple ability to control or manipulate the behavior of the targeted individual. For example, laboratory chimps will patiently wait for strangers or visitors to approach, and then they will throw at them. They do not conceal their intentions and will often stand bipedal and threaten to throw by cocking their arm with the projectile in their hand in preparation. The passers-by can see this and will often try and negotiate with the chimps to put it down, or they will try to trick the ape by stopping, then dashing rapidly past the ape enclosure. This seems to be the reaction the apes hope to get from the humans, and in operant conditioning terms, is the only reward the chimpanzees receive for throwing. So perhaps Bigfoot just wants to make you dance, you puny humans. Maybe they find it funny. Even so, throwing anything at anyone else is still an aggressive action to take, no matter the intention behind it. All right. Another aggressive action noted in many encounters, car chasing. From John Green's book, Sasquatch, the Apes Among Us. Don Worley comes to the rescue with a letter from a notary public in Dothan, Alabama, recounting what he was told by a friend regarding an incident in Dothan on the night of May 23, 1976. The friend, a Baptist minister, was driving on Old Taylor Road in a wooded area within the city limits when something dark jumped out on the side of the road, just where it crosses a stream. He stopped abruptly and got a good look in his headlights at a creature slightly under 6 feet tall, very heavily built, and covered with dark hair. The face resembled that of a human, but the eyes were red. The creature started towards the car, and the minister, frightened, floored the gas pedal. As he accelerated, the creature ran beside the car along the edge of the road, and it was still there when the car reached 70 miles per hour. Just past Hatton Road, approaching the crossing of another stream, the creature dropped slightly behind the car, crossed the road, and in one leap disappeared in the woods again. It had run beside the car for about a mile. And here's another one, summed up from a BigfootEncounters.com database story that took place a bit more recently in 1998. A 22-year-old man had taken his girlfriend for an evening ride on his ATV on some back trails of Daniel Boone National Forest. They had gone pretty far in and had arrived at a favorite spot of the man's beside a pond. It was pitch black out there, and they were about to get off and enjoy a little stargazing when he says they heard a roar from the tree line behind them, 40 to 50 yards away. It was unlike any sound he'd ever heard before. With his girlfriend screaming behind him, he restarted the ATV and they took off for the trail back out. As quickly as they could on this windy path at night, they made their way down it, him noting there were 3 lights on the ATV, 2 pointing forward and 1 on a swivel, so as they went he kept swinging it and looking side to side. When he reached the next larger road to turn onto a few hundred yards from the pond, now that the trees were more sparse, he noticed something off to their left, a bipedal humanoid figure running parallel to them through the trees. He glanced away and then back to see it keeping pace with them. He was going 22 miles per hour at this point. So, this thing they had heard hundreds of yards back had been chasing them the entire time and was now continuing to do so. After a final turn onto an even larger level road, they were able to gun it and would end up losing the creature. You might be thinking, well, dogs chase cars. They might do it for all kinds of reasons. It's instinctual. They see it as a game. That's not necessarily aggressive. I would say that I think a Bigfoot's reasons for chasing a moving vehicle might be a bit more expansive than that. While a dog may not know what to even do with a moving car if they were to ever actually catch it, we already have stories of what a Sasquatch might do. I spoke about the Flintville monster in our episode about Bigfoot across the country. This particular individual hated him some cars. One woman had to smash herself down on her own floorboards as this thing attacked her car, breaking off her antenna and rocking the vehicle, jumping up and down on the roof. A local pastor and plumber both reported their windshields had been smashed to bits by the creature. In 2012, a camper and Bigfoot hunter in Pennsylvania reported that a Sasquatch vandalized his Winnebago after walking around the vehicle and then throwing rocks specifically to bust out his light. The man said he believed its actions to be a warning to get out of its territory. And Buckeye Bigfoot received a really interesting and detailed story from a couple out camping who had been scared into sleeping in their car by a Sasquatch, and then later in the night were trapped in that car as the creature had come back and stood hovering outside, continually flipping at the handle of the locked door, peering in the window, trying to get in. Both wild and captive chimps have also been reported to become enraged, chasing, not bluff charging, and vandalizing vehicles, trying to get at the people inside. If we still don't think the chasing of cars is all that aggressive, what about the chasing of people on foot? Again, with the Flintville monster, 1976, Mrs. Robertson heard her 4-year-old son, who had been in the yard playing, start screaming. She ran outside to see a huge 7 to 8 foot tall, hair-covered, ape-like figure running across the yard toward him. She quickly grabbed her son and jumped inside her house moments before its outstretched hands could snatch him up. In the 80s, a black, hairy creature chased a housewife into her house and then beat on the door. Another encounter, this one submitted to the BFRO database, took place in 1983 in Florida. Early one morning, a teenager had been on a trip with his parents to visit his uncle in Bradenton. He awoke early one morning before anyone else and decided to go sit and look out over the water of the Manatee River at a spot he had frequented in the past, located about 200 yards away from his uncle's place, and just enjoy that early morning peace. He spent about 20 minutes doing so before starting his walk back. As he began his walk, he heard noise behind him by the river, turned, and watched as a 7.5 foot tall, 400 to 500 pound creature covered in dark brown hair stepped up into view. He said it was looking all around it when it caught a glimpse of the kid, then did a double take and stopped, staring as the frozen boy stood staring right back. Suddenly, the creature began barreling directly toward him. The teen began to run. He would have to leap a barbed wire fence that ran somewhat along his path back, but struggled to get over it, ripping his pants. He says as he landed on the other side, he stood up just 6 feet from and face to face with the creature on the other side of the barrier, who had caught up in no time. It reached for him, and he started booking it along the fence as the creature kept up with him just on the other side. He says at a certain point it ran into or got caught up in a thicket, and the boy was able to leave it behind as he made it to safety. He states it was aggressive. He was running for his life, and he felt the creature was attacking him, but he didn't know for what reason. Bigfoot has also been known to chase dogs. To kill dogs. I asked Carter Bouchard about this during our chat a couple of months ago. Simply put, he said, they don't like dogs. They are loud and good at giving away the position of an elusive animal who perhaps would like to retain its anonymity. So, keep your dog on a leash if you are out there. I gather from numerous stories where thankfully nothing happened to them, most dogs have been terrified in reported close encounters. The eyewitness reports that their dog, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, starts acting strange, whimpering, cowering, refusing to leave their owner or a place of safety to go investigate. They know what's up. Unfortunately, there are stories where something did happen, and the human experiencer walked away from that experience minus their dog. There is a horrible story in Tim Lyon's book, The Bigfoot Report, Volume 2, that was reported to him from a dog walker who was out walking his client's little dog, ran into a Sasquatch. The dog got so scared it leapt from their arms and took off. The Sasquatch gave chase, and I will spare you the details, but it did catch up. Hurts my heart, but I think it's a behavior that should be included here because it is an aggressing action, not against us. Like, it's not personal or anything, unless it is. As I recall, the Lake Minnewanka creature killed some dogs after literally every person in town took every opportunity to shoot the damn thing. So that might have been personal, but as awful as it is, as aggressive as we may perceive it, I don't suspect it's done out of a malicious place. Sasquatch has also been seen chasing and capturing other animals, presumably to feed itself. It is thought the creature is omnivorous, relying mostly on plant organic foodstuffs, but would also require protein. This isn't making it any better, I know. But though there are not a ton of eyewitness accounts, there are some of Bigfoot chasing deer and other large game animals, snatching up rabbits and squirrels, catching fish, yanking out clams. It's omnivorous, but a predator. And in theory, as a predator, probably has a prey drive it cannot help. So, there's that. Let's move on. If we consider Bigfoot chases cars, chases people, attempts to attack people, this is what some folks have reported taking place, we have to wonder if the victim doesn't sometimes get got. And then what happens? Let's consider the options. Does Bigfoot kidnap people? Allegedly, he or she does. But if so, to what purpose? Allegedly. Elkanah Walker, a missionary to the Spokane tribe of the Pacific Northwest, wrote an account of Sasquatch-type creatures in 1840, calling them men stealers. In 1866, George Gibbs, a Smithsonian Institution spokesperson, wrote of the Nisqually's Tsiatko, a Bigfoot-like creature known to abduct young Native women specifically for the purpose of breeding. A Native woman would tell J.W. Burns of her abduction as a teen in 1871 and being forced to swim across the Harrison River before being carried to its rock shelter. She was its captive for a year. And another account comes from around the turn of the century, where a woman was abducted from a fishing camp, held captive by a Sasquatch, and would be impregnated. Her son, described as simian and very ugly, would live to marry and father 5 children. There are a handful of native tales of abduction by these creatures. Not an overwhelming amount, but they are in the literature. And the trend and motivation behind it seems to continue into the 20th century. The most famous Bigfoot abduction story of all time being that of Albert Ostman in 1924, taken while in his sleeping bag and held captive by a family of Sasquatch for 6 days for the purpose of being a mate to their daughter. A very similar story took place not too long after that to tribesman Mukalat Harry, also kidnapped while sleeping and deposited into a group of 20 Sasquatch. Fearing he was not there for mating but for eating, he would make his escape. And the abduction stories do continue beyond that, even up to the present day, though seeming to go off the rails a little bit, if that is possible to go off the rails, any more than they already did. They start to get a little scandalous. It has gotten so incredibly bizarre. We're talking tabloid headlines like, "I was Bigfoot's sex slave," or "Woman kidnapped by Bigfoot, has baby." An interesting turn of events earlier in the 20th century, which I think play a massive role in the rail off-going, was the cinema the studios were putting out. That might not be fair to say it's all pop culture's fault, because throughout the history of human artists knowing about apes and monkeys and wild men, they have crafted paintings and sculptures depicting the very strong non-human primate making off with the helpless lady to go do stuff. But with movies like Bigfoot Breeds with Anything, Nights with Sasquatch, Bride of the Gorilla, I think it has possibly inspired some modern stories of Bigfoot abduction, if not modern Bigfoot erotica, which in itself has possibly inspired modern stories of Bigfoot abduction, and so the cycle continues. Think what you want about Bigfoot kidnapping. There are stories. I do find the earlier ones amongst the native tribes to be interesting. If there is any truth to these stories whatsoever, I would say kidnapping, for any reason, is a pretty aggressive thing to do and is considered here in our options of what has been the aftermath people have reported of having been caught by Sasquatch. Which brings us to our other option. Let's imagine not being caught up to by a randy Bigfoot, but an angry one, an enraged one intent on doing us harm. I was moving so fast, I didn't stop to open the door. I just ran through it. Bobby Ford is quoted as saying in the Texarkana Gazette, May 3rd, 1971. The Ford family were new tenants to their home in Fouke, and in the 5 days they had lived there, became very aware of a bipedal creature stalking them and the premises. By the time their climactic encounter and attack by the creature was published, in this May 3rd article, the creature had already paid them a visit 3 times. Earlier in the week, their wives heard something walking on the front porch, and on the night of the attack, it had tried to get into their house. After it first tried to reach in through a window, the Ford men with guns in hand spotted it around back and would open fire. It would escape, but return the same night. The men would shoot at it again, this time successfully. Or so they thought. As they approached where they thought they had seen the creature fall, a commotion back inside the house caused Bobby Ford to turn around and head back. I was walking the rungs of a ladder to get back up on the porch when the thing grabbed me. I felt a hairy arm come over my shoulder, and the next thing I knew, we were on the ground. The only thing I could think about was to get out of there. The thing was breathing real hard, and his eyes were about the size of a $50 and real red. I finally broke away and ran around the house and through the front door. Bobby would be treated at the hospital for scratches and shock the day following the encounter. Lucky for Bobby, he got away, and his injuries weren't more severe. This report frightened families at the time who lived in the area, and it is a very scary encounter, but mild compared to what might have happened if Bobby hadn't gotten away, if the creature had succeeded in entering the house, if it had gotten the upper hand on all of them. One of the most widely known accounts of suspected murder of a human by Sasquatch was told by Teddy Roosevelt in one of his books, The Wilderness Hunter, which he published in 1893. He presents a personal story told to him by a man named Bauman of an experience he had while trapping furs with a companion in the Bitterroot Range of the Rocky Mountains. Bauman's story goes that he and his trapping partner decided to try their luck in a particularly wild, remote pass that was said to be full of beavers. The pass had a certain reputation, though, as the previous year a hunter in that area had been viciously attacked and his body half-eaten by some wild animal. Bauman and company weren't too worried, though. Both men were experienced and hardy, so they took their horses as far as they could take them, tethering them at the foot of the pass, struck out on foot up into the forest, and 4 hours later, they set up camp. After that, they decided to spend the remaining hours of daylight left scoping out their trapping area. At dusk, they would return to camp to find some animal had rummaged through their belongings and knocked down their lean-to. It had left many footprints, but thinking it was a bear to blame, they didn't think too much about it and busied themselves putting everything back together. Afterward, as Bauman cooked dinner, his partner studied the tracks a bit more closely, following them the way they led out. After a while, he returned to the fire and said, "Bauman, that bear has been walking on 2 legs." After discussing the chances it could be a human that had done the damage, they decided that was an impossibility. Shortly following, both would go to sleep. At midnight, Bauman would be awakened suddenly by a noise. He sat up, caught a strong animal odor, and saw a dark, shadowy thing looming at the opening of their lean-to. Bauman fired at it, and then listened as whatever it was trampled off into the forest. Both men would stay up sitting by the fire the rest of the night, but heard nothing else. The next morning, they set out together to check traps and set new ones and would return to camp by evening. As they neared camp, they saw it had been ransacked and turned over once again, lean-to torn down, and plenty of footprints left all over the place. Upon inspection of the prints, it did indeed appear that whatever the animal was, it was walking on 2 feet. Feeling very uneasy now, they opted to build up a raging fire and take shifts throughout the night, one keeping guard while the other slept. Around midnight, something could be seen coming down through the forest opposite the stream from them, but would stay put out of the reach of the fire for about an hour before it let out a harsh, long, and drawn-out moaning. The following morning, it was decided they were done there now, and it was time to move on. Together, they went about gathering up traps, noting the feeling of being followed, but worked to collect their traps until noon. By this time, they had worked their way back around toward camp, and there were just 3 left to collect from a nearby pond. Bauman volunteered to quickly grab those, while his partner made his way back to begin packing up their things. In the bright sunlight, fears had lessened. Bauman would collect the traps. However, a surprise beaver capture would keep him at the pond for several hours to prepare and secure the animal. Once finished, he hurried toward camp as he eyed the setting sun. When their camp was in sight, he called out. There was no answer. He grew closer and saw the campfire had only recently gone out. He noticed their completed packs, neatly arranged and ready to go. And then he noticed the body of his partner, lying along a fallen tree trunk. His body was still warm. His neck was broken. There were 4 fang marks in his throat. And surrounding his dead body were a good amount of those same footprints. Bauman believed the creature to be something half human or half devil. He would leave everything but his rifle and quickly make his way down the pass and back to the horses. Spooky story, right? Could be total fiction. The tall campfire tale of a mountain man trapper. But Roosevelt would say Bauman had told it with a straight face, and he was rather impressed by it. So, could it be true? Apparently, in the Thompson Flat area on the Sixes River in Oregon, people had a history of being terrorized by a local Bigfoot. From the BigfootEncounters.com database, according to local legend, it had been a mining town in the 1800s, but residents began to slowly evacuate the area due to a strange, hairy creature who matched the description of a Sasquatch who roamed the area. All left, save one miner who decided to stay. After some time, though, his body would be discovered near his sluice box. His head had been bashed in with a rock, which lay near his body. He had been the only living person in the area. I spoke with Beans Baxter not too long ago about Port Chatham and their legendary violent creature, the Nantinaq. Beans was on a team who shot a documentary about their investigation in the area. I also got to speak with Jeff Davis, who was the historian for the show Alaskan Killer Bigfoot. He and I talked Nantinaq and Portlock during our backstage chat for Patreon. Both were very illuminating talks about this story. The story seems almost too dramatic to even be real, but the history of the location is true. The history of the deaths and what happened to people there is true. And the native story of a creature matching the description of Bigfoot, haunting the area, protecting its territory, is a real legend. It's such a sketchy feeling I get when I think about Port Chatham and the death toll. More folks died there than I was made aware of when I first began research on this site. It's eerie to think, what if the native legends are not just legend? And what if that creature was in fact responsible for the very strange deaths in the area and for the ultimate exodus of the residents? Now, these are all just anecdotal. Let's keep that in mind. Nobody saw a Bigfoot murdering a person. It's just theory at best. People love having an answer to an inexplicable mystery they cannot answer any other way that seems to tie it all up in a pretty little bow, even if that answer is yet another mystery. No one can say for certain, yes, Sasquatch kills. But it's not hard to believe when we think of other aggressive actions reported, all of the stories, the sheer size and strength of the creature. Are we dealing with the psychopathic psychology of a chimpanzee? Are we dealing with the naturally gentle temperament of a gorilla? Or are they more human in nature? Individuals making unique choices, some good, some bad, some days are better than others, every now and then making rash decisions. For all our sakes, I hope it's not that. There's nothing more potentially dangerous and aggressive than a human. I'll take on the psycho chimp any day. Here is something else to consider while taking these stories into account. We can look at examples right now of times Bigfoot has been used as a scapegoat for the evil doings of humans on others. In 1987, 43-year-old Russell Skip Welch would take 16-year-old Teresa Beyer out camping and Bigfoot hunting in Ghost Canyon in the Sierras. He would return without her. While his story would change many times as to where they camped and what actually happened, his version that a community of Bigfoot he had discovered and had been in contact with ended up taking her really sticks out. Officials didn't have enough evidence but suspected Skip had murdered her and disposed of her body. Fearing double jeopardy later, Skip would not be charged with murder and lived freely until he died 11 years later. Teresa was never found, and Bigfoot remains connected to her disappearance. I hadn't even heard of this cold case. The only reason I learned of it was the Bigfoot connection. In 1993, 3 weed farm workers were found mutilated, torn limb from limb, heads ripped from their bodies. Nothing was taken including the valuable marijuana plants, and they were surrounded by giant footprints. Whew, grisly scene. Had to be Bigfoot. Couldn't have possibly had anything to do with the area having been a hotspot for cartel activities and massive amounts of dope deals. There was a really good docuseries on Hulu about this case. It's just called Sasquatch. I mean, check it out. It was really good. There have also been many attempts to connect missing 411 disappearances to Bigfoot. So he's an easy target. But all things considered from today's show, one final impression I would like to leave with you is this. One of the books I relied on heavily for research today is called When Bigfoot Attacks. It is written by Michael Newton, published in 2011. He goes above and beyond with his deep dive into this particular side of the story. He consulted quite a few sources and numerous database accounts for the information that made it into his book. And he points out something incredibly important after all was said and done. First off, he points out that there exists not one comprehensive, reliable database that contains all reports. I think that could use some changing, don't you? So he had to consult many different ones and considered the sheer amount of sightings and encounters reported by other various sources. For North America, these include John Green's claim of 1,677 by 1978, Rick Barry's tabulation of 1,050, Christopher Murphy's 2,557, Ray Crow's International Bigfoot Society database prior to its sudden departure from the interwebs that contained more than 4,000 as of 2009, Sasquatch Information Society's 2,408 as of 2009, the BFRO's 3,869 as of 2009, and researcher Autumn Williams' collection of 2,416 as of 2009. From these sources, and some additional sources which he cites in the book, he filtered through to pull all instances of Sasquatch aggression towards humans, property, and pets, which included instances of possible homicide, assault, attacks on animals, home invasion, vehicle vandalism, and throwing of objects, and he was able to walk away with a grand total of 456 cases he could use for his book. Less than 500 out of, I'm sorry, how many? There were so many. I'm being cheeky here, but I think you catch my drift, right? Bigfoot may throw things at you, chase your car, try to reach in your window sometimes, like you do. But I am gathering that it's a few and far between kind of thing, you know? I am thinking Bigfoot poses very little threat in the grand scheme of things Bigfoot. It's good to be aware of the possibility, I will say that. But good grief. We've got actual humans doing evil and psychopathic chimps to worry about, okay? Put your dog on a leash and go enjoy your hike, you guys. That will be a wrap on today's show. Join me for a final note. So I've been thinking a lot about this to shoot or not to shoot dilemma. Personally, I stand in the not to shoot category. If they are out there, it just ain't right to kill one. If folks are going to prove their existence, I am in the camp that you are going to have to find another way. There's got to be another way. I know, how very unscientific of me. But as I continue to think on this possible scenario. The day finally arrives where Bob's your uncle out of the backwoods of Tennessee comes forward and he says, "Yo, I got one in my trap. It's alive. Come, scientists, come, look, see, study." Yay! They're real animals beyond any more doubt. Anyone who's ever seen one is vindicated. All skeptics are put to shame. Will that actually be a good thing? Did you guys hear about Ana Julia? The largest snake in the world was discovered 6 weeks ago in Brazil. At 440 pounds, 26 feet long, head the size of a human's, her body as thick as a tire. This snake was awesome. And she was dubbed Ana Julia. Ana Julia was discovered to be a new species of anaconda in addition to being the largest, the northern green anaconda. Now, I am not a snake person, but watching her through the safety of my computer screen, swimming unbothered beside researchers, just living her best life, it's hard to not see the sheer majesty of a creature like that. So, largest snake in the world, brand new species. We have had this talk before. Brand new species discovered. Hunters killed her last week. Just shot her. Why? Well, because, I guess. It's hard for me to imagine a world in which humans know Bigfoot is real, where Bigfoot is safe from humans. So not only do I side with the non-kill crowd, I'm starting to wonder if we shouldn't just leave them be altogether. But what do you guys think? Where do you stand on this debate? Drop your comments below. Let's talk about it. Follow the show on all socials at Paranorm Girl Pod. Yes, even TikTok. Gonna drive that one till the wheels come off. Be sure you are subscribed to the PGP YouTube channel. This week, I had to go old school audio just. It was unavoidable, but you can regularly catch video versions of these episodes over on YouTube. You can also join me there live every month on my other show, Beer, Booze, and Boogeymen. Our next stream is happening this Saturday, April 6, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, and we will be discussing and accepting listener stories about spooky AI and haunted electronics. If I don't see you this Saturday, join me next week for an all-new edition of the Conversation series. My guest is Laura Krantz, host of Wild Thing Podcast, longtime investigative reporter, and cousin to our final of 4 horsemen of Sasquatchery, Dr. Grover Krantz. Really looking forward to that. Have a great rest of your week, and until next time, stay safe, keep the nightlight on, and sleep with one eye open.